In the grand theater of human existence, where men and women dance to the rhythms of their desires and fears, there exists a profound truth that separates the rulers from the ruled, the masters from the slaves. This truth, as ancient as civilization itself yet as relevant as the morning sun, speaks to the very core of human power. Those who remain emotionally attached to outcomes, people, and circumstances become prisoners of their own making, while those who learn the art of detachment become architects of their destiny. Consider the merchant who stakes his entire fortune on a single venture, his nights consumed by worry, his days shadowed by the terror of loss. Watch him as he checks his investments obsessively, as his mood rises and falls with the market's whims. This man, though he may possess great wealth, is poorer than the beggar who owns nothing yet fears nothing. For the merchant has made himself a slave to circumstances beyond his control, while the beggar, having nothing to lose, moves through the world with a freedom that no amount of gold can purchase. The wise understand that attachment is the root of all human suffering and weakness. When we tie our peace of mind, our sense of worth, our very identity to external factors, whether they be relationships, possessions, status, or outcomes, we hand over the keys to our emotional kingdom to forces that care nothing for our well-being. We become like ships tossed about by every wind, our direction determined not by our own compass but by the storms that surround us. This principle extends far beyond material possessions. The politician who desperately clings to power finds himself making compromises that erode his very soul. The lover who cannot bear the thought of separation becomes possessive, jealous, and ultimately drives away the very person they seek to hold close. The parent who lives vicariously through their child's achievements robs both themselves and their offspring of authentic experience and growth. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, where Niccolò Machiavelli observed the rise and fall of princes, this truth played out with dramatic clarity. Those rulers who governed from a place of emotional detachment, who could make decisions based on reason rather than passion, who could sacrifice the temporary for the eternal, who could remain unmoved by flattery or threat, these were the ones who built lasting legacies. Meanwhile, those who ruled from emotion, who made decisions based on personal grudges or desperate desires for approval, found their kingdoms crumbling beneath them like castles built on sand. The path to emotional detachment begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of viewing ourselves as victims of circumstance, we must recognize ourselves as conscious beings capable of choosing our responses to whatever life presents. This is not to say that we become cold or unfeeling, quite the opposite. True detachment allows us to engage more fully with life because we are not constantly protecting ourselves from imagined threats or chasing after elusive satisfactions. When we observe successful individuals across history, whether in business, politics, the arts, or spiritual pursuits, we invariably find this quality of detachment at work. They pursue their goals with passion and determination, yes, but they hold their outcomes lightly. They understand the difference between being committed to their actions and being attached to their results. This distinction is crucial, for it is the difference between freedom and bondage. The businessman who approaches each deal with complete commitment but genuine indifference to whether it succeeds or fails paradoxically increases his chances of success. Why? Because his decisions are not clouded by fear or desperation. He can negotiate from a position of strength because he truly has nothing to lose. He can walk away from bad deals because his identity is not wrapped up in any particular outcome. This inner freedom translates into outer power. Similarly, in relationships, those who love without attachment create space for genuine connection to flourish. They can give freely because they expect nothing in return. They can be vulnerable because they do not depend on the other person's response for their sense of worth. They can allow their partners to be fully themselves because they are not trying to extract validation or security from the relationship. The journey toward emotional detachment requires us to examine the beliefs and stories we tell ourselves about what we need to be happy or secure. Most of these stories are inherited from our culture, our families, or our past experiences, and many of them serve no purpose other than to keep us trapped in cycles of wanting and fearing. We might believe that we need a certain amount of money to feel secure, a particular person's love to feel worthy, or specific achievements to feel successful. But, when we look closely at these beliefs, we often find they are built on shaky foundations. The millionaire who still feels poor, the beloved celebrity who feels unworthy of love, the highly accomplished professional who feels like a fraud, these examples show us that external conditions have little to do with internal states of being. The practice of detachment asks us to hold these beliefs lightly, to recognize them as preferences rather than necessities. We can still work toward our goals and enjoy our relationships, but we do not make our peace of mind dependent on achieving any particular outcome. This shift in perspective can be initially unsettling because it challenges some of our deepest assumptions about how life works. We have been conditioned to believe that caring more leads to better results, that worry shows love, that anxiety demonstrates responsibility. But observation and experience teach us otherwise. The parent who worries constantly about their child's safety may actually inhibit the child's development of independence and resilience. The employee who is anxious about job security may make decisions from fear that actually make them less valuable to their organization. Emotional detachment, properly understood, is not about becoming indifferent or uncaring. Rather, it is about caring so much that we want the best possible outcome, and we recognize that our attachment and anxiety often interfere with our ability to create those outcomes. It is about loving so deeply that we want our loved ones to be free, even if that freedom sometimes takes them away from us. The cultivation of this detachment requires daily practice and constant vigilance. We must learn to catch ourselves in moments of attachment, when we feel our mood shifting based on external events, when we find ourselves desperately hoping for particular outcomes, when we notice ourselves trying to control things beyond our influence. In these moments, we can pause and remember that our well-being comes from within, not from without. One powerful practice is to regularly contemplate the temporary nature of all external conditions. The wealth that seems so important today may be gone tomorrow. The relationship that feels so essential may change or end. The achievement that seems so crucial may lose its significance with time. This is not a pessimistic view but a realistic one, and it can actually free us to enjoy these things more fully while they last. Another essential practice is to develop what might be called outcome independence, the ability to take action based on our values and wisdom rather than our hopes and fears. This means doing what we believe is right regardless of how others might respond. It means pursuing our goals because the pursuit itself is meaningful, not because we are desperate for particular results. As we develop this capacity for detachment, we begin to notice profound changes in how we move through the world. Situations that once would have triggered intense emotional reactions become interesting challenges to navigate. People who once had the power to upset us lose that power entirely. Circumstances that once would have sent us into spirals of worry or excitement are met with a calm steadiness that allows for clearer thinking and more effective action. This transformation does not happen overnight, and it is not always comfortable. There may be periods where we feel disconnected or wonder if we are becoming cold or uncaring. This is natural and temporary. True detachment actually increases our capacity for genuine love and compassion because we are no longer filtered through the lens of our own needs and fears. The world begins to lose its power over us not because we stop caring, but because we care from a place of strength rather than weakness. We love from abundance rather than scarcity. We act from wisdom rather than reaction. And, in doing so, we discover that we have far more power to shape our experience than we ever imagined possible. Part 2, The Alchemy of Self-Destruction. The process of destroying one's weak self is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in the pursuit of personal power and freedom. To the uninitiated, it sounds harsh, even violent. Yet this destruction is not about becoming less human but about becoming more fully human, stripping away the false layers of identity that keep us small, reactive, and vulnerable to external manipulation. The weak self is not our true nature but rather a collection of learned responses, inherited fears, and unconscious patterns that have accumulated over years of living defensively. It is the part of us that seeks approval, avoids discomfort, and makes decisions based on what others might think rather than what we know to be right. It is the voice that tells us we are not enough, that we need external validation to feel worthy, that we must protect ourselves from the judgment or rejection of others. This weak self develops early in life as a survival mechanism. Children learn quickly what behaviors earn praise and what actions lead to punishment. They adapt their personalities to fit the expectations of parents, teachers, and peers. Over time, these adaptations become so ingrained that we forget they are adaptations at all, we mistake them for our true selves. But, the strategies that may have served us as children often become liabilities as adults. The people-pleasing that earned us love from parents may prevent us from setting healthy boundaries in relationships. The perfectionism that brought us good grades may paralyze us when facing new challenges where failure is possible. The agreeableness that kept us safe in childhood may make us pushovers in professional settings. The destruction of the weak self begins with recognition, seeing clearly the ways in which our unconscious patterns limit our effectiveness and authenticity. This requires brutal honesty about our motivations. Are we pursuing this career because it genuinely excites us, or because we want our parents to be proud? Are we saying yes to this request because we believe it's the right thing to do, or because we're afraid of disappointing someone? Are we holding on to this relationship because it brings joy and growth, or because we fear being alone? This self-examination can be uncomfortable because it reveals the extent to which we have been living reactively rather than consciously. We may discover that many of our choices have been made not from our authentic desires but from unconscious attempts to meet the expectations of others or to avoid difficult emotions like rejection, failure, or loneliness. The next phase of this destruction involves consciously choosing to act against these limiting patterns, even when doing so feels uncomfortable or scary. If we have been people pleasers, we must practice saying no to requests that don't align with our values or priorities. If we have been perfectionists, we must deliberately engage in activities where we might fail or look foolish. If we have been conflict avoidant, we must learn to speak our truth even when it might create tension. These acts of conscious rebellion against our old patterns are like controlled burns in a forest. They clear away the undergrowth of limiting beliefs and habits that have been choking our growth, making space for something stronger and more authentic to emerge. Each time we choose courage over comfort, truth over approval, wisdom over popularity, we strengthen our true self while weakening the grip of the false self. Consider the executive who has built her career on being the reliable team player, never challenging authority, always saying yes to additional responsibilities. She may have achieved success through this strategy, but she has also limited her potential by never fully expressing her ideas or standing up for her convictions. The destruction of her weak self would involve learning to voice disagreement when appropriate, to delegate rather than taking on everything herself, and to prioritize her own vision rather than simply executing others' plans. This process requires courage because it often means disappointing people who have become accustomed to our old patterns. Family members may resist when we stop playing familiar roles. Colleagues may push back when we begin setting firmer boundaries. Friends may feel uncomfortable when we become more direct and honest in our communication. But here lies one of the great paradoxes of this work: as we become less concerned with others' approval, we often earn more genuine respect. People may initially resist our new authenticity, but, over time, many will appreciate our honesty and integrity. Those who cannot handle our authentic self were likely holding us back anyway. The destruction of the weak self also involves confronting our deepest fears and insecurities head-on rather than organizing our lives around avoiding them. If we fear public speaking, we seek out opportunities to speak publicly. If we fear rejection, we put ourselves in situations where rejection is possible. If we fear failure, we pursue challenges where failure is likely. This is not masochistic behavior but strategic conditioning. By voluntarily exposing ourselves to the things we fear in controlled ways, we build psychological resilience and reduce these fears' power over us. We discover that most of our fears are based on imagination rather than reality, and that we are far more capable of handling difficulty than we believed. The businessman who has always feared losing money might intentionally make investments where loss is possible, not recklessly but with calculated risks that challenge his need for financial security. Through this process, he discovers that his worth is not dependent on his net worth, and this realization frees him to make bolder, more innovative decisions in his business. Another crucial aspect of this self-destruction involves questioning and often rejecting the stories we have told ourselves about what we need to be happy or successful. The weak self is built on a foundation of I need statements. I need people to like me, I need to be successful, I need to avoid conflict, I need to be in control. These supposed needs are actually preferences that we have elevated to the status of necessities. True freedom comes from recognizing that we don't actually need most of what we think we need. We prefer certain outcomes, but our well-being doesn't depend on achieving them. This recognition is incredibly liberating because it means we can pursue our goals with full commitment while remaining unattached to the results. The artist who has always believed she needs critical acclaim to validate her work might deliberately create art that she knows will be misunderstood or controversial. Through this process, she discovers that her creativity is independent of external validation, and this discovery allows her to create more boldly and authentically. As we engage in this process of systematically destroying the weak aspects of our personality, we may go through periods that feel like death and rebirth. Old identities fall away, leaving us feeling temporarily unmoored. Relationships may change or end. Familiar sources of satisfaction may lose their appeal. This is normal and necessary. It is the space between who we were and who we are becoming. During these transitional periods, it's important to remember that what feels like loss is actually liberation. We are not becoming less, we are becoming more ourselves. The parts of our personality that are dying are the parts that were never truly ours anyway. They were adaptations, masks, false selves that we wore to fit in or get by. The strong self that emerges from this process is characterized by several qualities that make it virtually indestructible by external forces. First, it is grounded in internal rather than external validation. This self knows its worth independent of others' opinions or circumstances. Second, it is flexible and adaptable because it is not rigidly attached to particular identities or outcomes. Third, it is authentic because it has stripped away the layers of pretense and people-pleasing that once defined it. This strong self is not invulnerable. It can still experience pain, loss, and disappointment. But it cannot be destroyed by these experiences because it does not depend on external conditions for its stability. It has learned to find meaning and purpose from within, to draw strength from its own values and convictions rather than from the approval or support of others. The transformation also affects how we relate to power and influence. The weak self seeks power over others as compensation for its own feelings of inadequacy. The strong self recognizes that true power comes from self-mastery and requires no external validation or control over others. This shift in understanding often makes us naturally more influential because people are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin and unafraid to be themselves. Moreover, this process of self-destruction and reconstruction creates what might be called anti-fragility, the ability to grow stronger under stress rather than simply surviving it. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to further refine and strengthen our authentic self. Setbacks become feedback. Criticism becomes data. Failure becomes education. The man or woman who has successfully destroyed their weak self cannot be destroyed by others because they have already done the hardest work themselves. They have faced their deepest fears, challenged their limiting beliefs, and stripped away their false identities. What remains is essentially indestructible because it is authentic, grounded, and self-validating. This does not mean they become cold or disconnected from others. Often, the opposite occurs. Having freed themselves from the need for approval or validation, they can love more freely, give more generously, and connect more authentically. They can be fully present with others because they are not constantly monitoring how they are being perceived or trying to manage others' impressions of them. The journey of destroying the weak self is ongoing rather than a one-time event. As we grow and evolve, new layers of conditioning and limitation may surface, requiring ongoing attention and conscious choice. But each cycle of destruction and reconstruction makes us stronger, more authentic, and more free. Part 3: The Architecture of Invincibility. Having understood the necessity of emotional detachment and the process of destroying the weak self, we arrive at the most practical and transformative aspect of this philosophy: the construction of an invincible character. This invincibility is not the crude fantasy of physical immunity or supernatural protection, but something far more profound, a psychological and spiritual architecture that renders one immune to the manipulations, attacks, and chaos that destroy lesser men. The invincible person is not one who never faces challenges or setbacks, but one who has developed such internal stability and strength that external circumstances cannot shake their core. They have built their life on a foundation so solid that the storms of fortune, the attacks of enemies, and the natural vicissitudes of existence serve only to reveal their strength rather than expose their weakness. This architecture of invincibility begins with the construction of an internal locus of control. Most people live at the mercy of external events, their mood and self-worth rising and falling with their circumstances. They celebrate when things go well and despair when things go poorly, never recognizing that they have handed over control of their emotional state to forces beyond their influence. The invincible person understands that while they cannot control what happens to them, they maintain absolute authority over their response to what happens. This seemingly simple distinction is actually revolutionary in its implications. It means that no person, situation, or event can determine their emotional state without their consent. It means that their peace of mind, their sense of purpose, and their fundamental well-being remain under their own governance regardless of external chaos. Building this internal control requires daily practice in choosing conscious responses over automatic reactions. When someone criticizes us, the automatic reaction might be defensiveness or anger. The conscious response involves pausing to consider whether the criticism contains useful information and responding from a place of curiosity rather than defensiveness. When a project fails, the automatic reaction might be self-blame or despair. The conscious response involves analyzing what went wrong, learning from the experience, and maintaining perspective on the larger picture. This shift from reactive to responsive living is perhaps the most important skill one can develop. It requires cultivating what might be called the pause, that moment of space between stimulus and response where choice lives. In that pause, we can ask ourselves, what response would serve me best in this situation? What would the person I aspire to be do here? What response aligns with my values rather than my emotions? The second pillar of invincibility is the development of self-sufficiency in all its forms. This includes financial self-sufficiency, which provides freedom from dependence on others for survival. But it extends far beyond money to include emotional self-sufficiency, not needing others' approval for self-worth, intellectual self-sufficiency, thinking for ourselves rather than accepting others' opinions uncritically, and spiritual self-sufficiency, finding meaning and purpose from within rather than from external sources. Financial independence deserves special attention because money, while not an end in itself, provides options and reduces vulnerability. The person who lives paycheck to paycheck is subject to economic pressures that can force them into compromising their values or accepting unacceptable conditions. Building wealth, even modest wealth, creates a buffer against these pressures and provides the freedom to make choices based on principle rather than necessity. But financial security without emotional and intellectual independence is insufficient. The wealthy person who still desperately needs others' approval is as vulnerable as the poor person who needs their next paycheck. They can be manipulated through flattery, isolation, or social pressure just as effectively as others can be controlled through economic pressure. True self-sufficiency involves developing the ability to be comfortable alone with our own thoughts and company. This means cultivating internal sources of entertainment, meaning, and satisfaction. It means being able to enjoy solitude rather than feeling compelled to fill every moment with external stimulation or social interaction. It means having a rich inner life that provides sustenance regardless of external circumstances. The third element of invincible character is the cultivation of indifference to outcomes while maintaining excellence in action. This paradoxical stance allows one to pursue goals with total commitment while remaining unattached to results. This indifference is not laziness or carelessness but rather a profound trust in the process over the outcome. The invincible person approaches each task, relationship, and challenge by asking not what do I want to get from this, but what can I give to this? They focus their energy on controlling their effort, their attitude, and their integrity rather than trying to control results that depend on factors beyond their influence. This shift in focus is incredibly liberating because it returns power to where it belongs, in our own hands. This principle applies equally to relationships, business ventures, creative projects, and personal goals. The entrepreneur who starts a business to serve a genuine need in the marketplace, who commits fully to providing excellent products or services, but who remains unattached to whether the business succeeds in conventional terms, paradoxically increases their chances of success while guaranteeing their peace of mind regardless of the outcome. The fourth pillar involves developing what might be called strategic relationships. The invincible person is not antisocial or isolated, but they are extremely intentional about their relationships. They cultivate connections based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation rather than neediness or convenience. This means being willing to be alone rather than settling for relationships that drain energy or compromise integrity. It means having the courage to end relationships that have become toxic or one-sided, even when doing so feels difficult or lonely. It means investing time and energy in relationships with people who inspire growth, challenge thinking, and support authentic expression. The invincible person also understands the importance of maintaining multiple sources of support rather than depending entirely on any single relationship. They build networks of mentors, peers, and friends across different areas of life, ensuring that no single person's approval or disapproval can destabilize their emotional equilibrium. The fifth element is the development of intellectual independence and critical thinking skills. The invincible person thinks for themselves rather than accepting popular opinions or conventional wisdom uncritically. They read widely, expose themselves to diverse perspectives, and form their own conclusions based on evidence and reasoning rather than emotion or social pressure. This intellectual independence makes them immune to propaganda, manipulation, and groupthink. They cannot be controlled through information manipulation because they verify information independently and think through implications for themselves. They cannot be swayed by emotional appeals that bypass rational analysis because they have trained themselves to pause and think before accepting new ideas or changing their positions. The sixth pillar is physical and mental health maintenance. The invincible person recognizes that their body and mind are their most important tools and treats them accordingly. They maintain physical fitness not for vanity but for the energy, confidence, and resilience it provides. They eat well, sleep adequately, and manage stress effectively because they understand that physical depletion makes them vulnerable to poor decision-making and emotional instability. Mental health maintenance includes practices like meditation, journaling, or other forms of self-reflection that help maintain clarity and emotional balance. It includes ongoing learning and intellectual stimulation to keep the mind sharp and engaged. It includes recognizing and addressing stress, anxiety, or depression before they become overwhelming. The seventh element involves developing multiple sources of meaning and identity. Most people define themselves by a single role or achievement: their job, their relationship status, their wealth, their appearance. This creates vulnerability because any threat to that single source of identity becomes an existential crisis. The invincible person cultivates meaning across multiple domains: their relationships, their work, their creative pursuits, their service to others, their personal growth, their spiritual development. This diversification means that setbacks in any one area, while disappointing, do not threaten their fundamental sense of purpose or identity. The eighth pillar is the practice of voluntary discomfort. This involves regularly choosing difficulty, challenge, and discomfort in order to maintain resilience and perspective. This might include physical challenges like exercise or cold exposure, social challenges like public speaking or difficult conversations, or psychological challenges like meditation or fasting. These voluntary difficulties serve several purposes. They build confidence in our ability to handle difficulty, they prevent us from becoming soft and comfort dependent, they provide perspective on what constitutes real problems versus mere inconveniences, and they strengthen our mental and emotional resilience. The final element of invincible character is the development of what might be called philosophical immunity, a coherent worldview that provides meaning and guidance regardless of circumstances. This involves developing clear values, principles, and beliefs that can serve as an anchor during turbulent times. This philosophical foundation might be religious, secular, or some combination, but it must be personally meaningful and intellectually honest. It should provide guidance for decision-making, comfort during difficulty, and perspective during both success and failure. It should help make sense of suffering, provide motivation for growth, and offer a framework for understanding our place in the larger scheme of existence. The person who has built this architecture of invincibility moves through the world with a particular quality that others immediately recognize, even if they cannot name it. They possess what might be called unshakable presence, a calm confidence that comes not from arrogance but from deep self-knowledge and self-acceptance. This presence affects others in profound ways. People are naturally drawn to those who seem genuinely comfortable in their own skin and unafraid to be themselves. The invincible person's lack of neediness, their emotional stability, and their authentic self-expression create a magnetic quality that attracts others while requiring nothing from them. In professional settings, this translates into natural leadership and influence. People instinctively trust and follow those who seem to know themselves and maintain their composure under pressure. In personal relationships, this quality creates deeper connections because others feel safe to be authentic around someone who is authentically themselves. Perhaps most importantly, this invincibility creates freedom from the need for external validation. freedom from the fear of loss or failure, freedom from the compulsion to control others or circumstances, freedom to pursue what truly matters regardless of others' opinions or society's expectations. This freedom is not licensed to act selfishly or irresponsibly. On the contrary, the truly invincible person often becomes more ethical and caring, not less, because their choices are no longer driven by fear, neediness, or ego. They can afford to be generous because they expect nothing in return. They can afford to be honest because they don't need others' approval. They can afford to take risks because they know their fundamental worth is not dependent on any particular outcome. The construction of this invincible character is not a destination but a lifelong practice. Each day provides opportunities to choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience, courage over safety. Each challenge becomes a chance to further refine and strengthen this inner architecture. Each setback becomes an opportunity to test and improve our resilience. The world needs more people who have done this work, individuals who cannot be bought, intimidated, or manipulated because they have built their lives on foundations that external forces cannot shake. These are the people who can provide stable leadership during turbulent times, who can speak truth when others remain silent, who can maintain hope and vision when others despair. In a world increasingly characterized by manipulation, distraction, and external control, the development of invincible character becomes not just a personal advantage but a form of service to others. By refusing to be controlled or diminished by external forces, we give others permission to do the same. By living authentically and courageously, we model what is possible for human beings who commit to their own growth and freedom. The path to invincibility begins with a single step: the decision to take responsibility for our own emotional state, our own choices, and our own development. From that decision flows everything else: the gradual construction of internal strength, the systematic destruction of limiting patterns, the patient cultivation of wisdom and resilience. This is not easy work, but it is the most important work we can do. For in building our own invincibility, we not only free ourselves but contribute to a world where manipulation and control have less power, where authenticity and courage are more common, and where human potential can be more fully realized. The promise is simple but profound: detach emotionally, and the world loses its power over you. Destroy your weak self, and you become indestructible to others. Build the architecture of invincibility, and you become not only free but a beacon of freedom for all who encounter you.